Welcome to this open house on the Officiant program of the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism. My name is Adam Shalom. I'm the Dean for North America of the Institute. I also work as a congregational rabbi in North Suburban Chicago, and I do life cycle events on the side, so to speak. Weddings and funerals and baby namings, and then, of course, bar mitzvahs, coming of age events through my congregation. Joining me today is Shira Collings, who is a psychotherapist, a miscarriage and bereavement doula, and also life cycle officiant for Folkshul, which is Philadelphia's secular humanistic Jewish community. She's a recent graduate of our officiant program, and I've invited her to share some of her thoughts about the role of the officiant, but also the program itself and what she's found meaningful, which we'll get to in just a few minutes. I wanted to open with a brief explanation of what humanistic Judaism is, because some people finding this may not know where we're coming from. In brief, humanistic Judaism is a cultural Jewish identity celebrated through a human-focused philosophy of life. So we understand our Jewishness as including history, language, food, holidays, life cycle events, literature, not just our foundational literature, but also literature created even in the modern period and in response, in dialogue with that traditional literature. Jewishness was created by the Jewish people over many centuries. It evolved and changed. It responded to new circumstances. It reflected new beliefs and values. And so too today does humanistic Judaism reflect that tradition, that Jewish change is the Jewish tradition. This is why we are open to creative approaches to ceremonies and life cycle events, but we do so through this human-focused philosophy of life, which means we focus on this world, this life, what people can do for themselves and what they can do together with each other. This is an important part of our value system, that people are in charge of their own life, and they also are in charge of celebrating the important moments in their lives with integrity, saying words they believe, and not having to say words or use symbols that they do not believe. So, with that brief overview of our approach to Jewish life and philosophy in general, and also as it applies to ceremonies, let me tell you briefly about the background of our officiant program. As you probably know, there are lots of ways you can get authorized to perform life cycle events. In some states in the United States, you're actually able to register as a day with no training whatsoever to be able to legally do weddings. And in many other places, they recognize online ordinations of varying degrees. Some places you could even choose which title you want for your certification, and then you just have to sign the right title on the certificates when you do so. But some years ago, the idea was developed that perhaps there could be some kind of training for people who want to officiate life cycle events, but aren't necessarily interested in a multi-year graduate level program like a rabbinic program, or even a multi-year, not quite graduate level program that our institute started beginning in 1987 called the Madrich or Madriche program, which is a community leader program. It includes how to manage a community, how to run a school. Maybe you're just interested in doing life cycle ceremonies, and that's your way of serving the Jewish community and providing meaning to people through this humanistic philosophy of Jewish identity. So, about 8 years ago, we created the Institute's Life Cycle Officiant program, which was designed to train people in the basics they needed to be able to perform life cycle events. And so, what I thought I'd do is share the page that describes the program on our website, briefly describe the requirements, and then I'll turn it over to Shira to talk about her experience taking the program, but also what she's found meaningful in doing the work. So, this is a description of our officiant program. You can find this on IISHJ.org under Programs Officiant. The goal of the program, as it says, is to train professionals who create and lead meaningful, secular, humanistic Jewish celebrations of the life cycle. In other words, we want people who are professional, who know what they're doing, who have some talent, some knowledge, some expertise, and who are not coming in just as a friend of the person who's doing the life cycle transition. Sometimes friends officiating can be wonderful. Sometimes they can be a disaster. But what I like to think is that we offer something that's special. We offer resources. We offer knowledge. We offer preparation. Just like you might want someone who's a professional to fix your plumbing or to repair your electrical system in your house. So too, maybe you want someone with professional background, experience, and expertise to be able to mark this moment in your life or your family's life. So the competency areas that we hope to develop for the students is to be able to create these ceremonies and lead them, but also to understand the basic philosophy of humanistic Judaism and how it applies to these kind of life cycle events, but also to understand the evolution of these life cycle events in Jewish life. So you can tell people a little bit about the background to the origins of the Jewish wedding, or how Jews marked funerals in the past and what options are available for us today. We also feel it's important to have some ability to provide philosophical guidance in manners about family dynamics or other issues that come up in life cycle events. What if a couple says, our mother is refusing to attend the wedding? And you can't just say, I'm the florist, that's not my department. If you're the officiant, you have a role to play in helping to advise them how to handle encouraging them to come, or occasionally how to deal with the reality they choose not to come. What happens next? How do we respond to that? This is part of our role as officiants. We're not quite, full rabbi clergy, but we are people who are helping to guide others through the process, and there is some counseling involved in that. So to be enrolled in the program, you have to be a member of our movement and can be committed to our philosophy. And the goal is to have people have been involved for a couple of years so they have a sense of who we are and have seen how we celebrate holidays and other major events. We have occasionally waived that requirement if someone is really gung-ho into the philosophy, but again, we want people to know what they're getting into. There's an interview process, an application to be completed, a couple of references, and a small application fee. The major requirements are to complete 3 seminars and a project. So the 3 seminars are the first 3 listed here. Basic ideas of secular humanistic Judaism, which is our core philosophy. How do we answer frequently asked questions that come up when people want to know who we are and what we do? The second is the celebration of the Jewish life cycle, which is where these life cycle celebrations came from, how they developed over time, and what our options are in leading these ceremonies today. The third is our philosophic guidance and counseling, as I described. How do we deal with some of those complex issues that come up when life cycle events happen? As you may have experienced, sometimes people are not on their best behavior when they're under high stress when it comes to a funeral or the arrival of a baby. And what am I supposed to do? And how do I do it? And my mom says this and her mom says that. Well, this is part of that process where we're the experts with expertise, but also with sensitive counseling skills to be able to guide you through that process. And then the last requirement here describes field work, which is to create a life cycle sampler under our direction and with our guidance so that you have at least a draft of what to do for a baby welcoming event or for a funeral service. And you get a sense of what a reasonable length would be, how to handle personal expression versus reading poetry or prose or other pre-prepared texts, how the flow might go. And we often have students who do just the major 4 of child arrival, coming of age, finding a partner, and saying goodbye. But others might choose other transition points because there are a lot of life cycles that we mark today. It could be the first time you vote. It could be the first time the kid leaves the house. Maybe that's a liberation for the parent. There's a biblical ceremony of weaning when a nursing mother no longer will nurse the child. And that's a transition point both for the child and for the mother in a very meaningful way sometimes, and sometimes in a painful, difficult way. So there are all kinds of other options that one could do in terms of officiating ceremonies, but also in terms of preparing this fieldwork sampler as just a chance to try it out in real life. Even if you haven't actually done it, you can do it using creative fictional characters or people that you know. Maybe even someone's asked you to do an event and you're preparing for that. That can be part of that fieldwork. So that's the gist of the program, is our basic philosophy, understanding the tasks involved, the life cycle events, having some of the philosophic counseling and guidance training necessary to help families through that process, and finally applying it to some extent in this hypothetical sense by creating these draft ceremonies so you have something prepared to officiate. And if you do want more information about the program, there is an online form to be able to fill out. And so with that overview of the background of the program and how it has been developed, I'd like to turn it over to Shira, who can share some thoughts on what she has found meaningful about life cycle events and what inspired her to pursue the program, and also how she found the program and what life has been like since she was our student some years ago.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for inviting me and having me speak as part of this. Um, So I grew up Reform Jewish, but I always kind of felt out of place due to being both an atheist and also being queer. And I felt even more out of place when I started dating my now husband, who didn't grow up Jewish, and intermarriage was always something that was kind of tolerated, but mostly discouraged. But I did still find it really important to be Jewish and still felt like that was an important part of my heritage. And so I spent a lot of my young adulthood trying to kind of reconcile that. And I eventually found my way to humanistic Judaism through an atheist meetup while I was in grad school. And someone recommended there is actually an atheist branch of Judaism. And it just really felt like a great fit. I really saw how intercultural relationships were embraced and all kinds of backgrounds and identities were embraced. And of course, how the language is actually saying what we mean rather than kind of using God language, even if we don't believe in that. And it just felt like I felt that sense of belonging. And so eventually I got married. And at the time, I was part of the Humanistic Jewish Havurah in Tampa. And the facilitator of that, or one of the facilitators, officiated our wedding. And that just felt very meaningful to me. It really represented who my husband and I were as a couple and as a family unit. And I just thought it did. The officiant did such a great job of kind of honoring both of our backgrounds and honoring our values and making it feel Jewish and like aligning with Jewish heritage and culture, but also being really accessible to people who had never been to any kind of Jewish life cycle event. Um, and one example of something that felt really meaningful is that instead of doing the traditional seven blessings, we did seven values. So we picked seven values that were really important to us in our marriage, and then had a little like description of each value. And then we had someone in our friend circle or family come up and read each value who we felt like embodied that value. And then we have kind of a poster art piece like with those values and the descriptions that we have in our living room still. And so that was just one of the many ways that we kind of adapted the traditions to be more in line with our values, but still in a way that honored my Jewish heritage. And I just found that really meaningful and a really important part of my life. Um, After I finished grad school, I came to Philadelphia and joined our local humanistic congregation here called Folkshul. Um, and then through Folkshul, we had a home blessing ceremony by the officiant there. And that was also just really beautiful and a really lovely way to honor our first home purchase and an example of how in humanistic Judaism, there's just all kinds of life cycle celebrations that we have and all kinds of ways to honor different milestones. It doesn't just have to be the traditional ones. Um, and so that kind of inspired me to look into how I could become an officiant. It just was really meaningful, and I just thought it was such a cool way to support people in celebrating things that align with their values and also in ways that honor their culture while still feeling authentic. And so I looked into just how people come to be an officiant. And I started asking the officiant at Folkshul, Kate Forrest, I was asking about her background, and that's how I found out that she had completed the IISSJ training. And she highly recommended it. And so, yeah, I got really interested in taking the training. It sounded like a good opportunity to just learn more about how I could support people with similar ceremonies that I had the opportunity to have. Um, And I also was really excited about the idea of getting some more formal Jewish education and taking on a little bit bigger of a role in the Jewish community. But I don't feel like I have the capacity to like become a rabbi or commit to multiple years of education beyond the grad school I've already done. And so this felt like a good way to kind of take more responsibilities and more leadership without like as full of a commitment as that requires. Um, and so I completed the program a couple years ago. And have just found it extremely meaningful to be able to help officiate life cycle ceremonies that really capture who someone is and what their values are and what they want to celebrate at that particular time in their life, celebrate or honor or commemorate. I officiated a wedding about a year ago where one partner was not Jewish, the other was, and the non-Jewish partner was really intimidated by the idea of a Jewish wedding. And I think there was a lot of anxiety and nervousness about having a Jewish wedding and what that would look like. And I think neither partner wanted a rabbi to officiate, but they did still want it. The Jewish partner wanted it to be somewhat Jewish, felt like it would be weird if there was like no acknowledgement of that. Um, and they did not know what humanistic Judaism was, and I think somehow found their way to Folkshul, Philly's humanistic congregation. I think their wedding planner knew of us. Um, and it was just really great working with them. I just kind of talked with them about kind of where they were at, what their backgrounds were, what they were envisioning for their wedding. And we found ways to incorporate some Jewish traditions with contemporary interpretations, but English only. We didn't do any Hebrew, and it was just kind of a very like light touch and really focused on like who they were as a couple and how these traditions supported that, but not anything that felt inaccessible to the partner who wasn't Jewish or his family. Um, and they both just spoke really positively of it and said that it really felt like it captured who they were and like who they wanted to present themselves to be to their community. And they felt like it was like the right amount of Judaism, which I think is really important that like people just have different traditions and different levels of incorporating Judaism that they're comfortable with. And it's just really nice to be able to like meet someone where they're at and not make them ever feel like they're not Jewish enough or like they're not doing it right. That whatever traditions are meaningful to them um, are important to incorporate. And there's no requirement for incorporating any traditions that don't feel authentic. Um, and in the last few months, I have now stepped into the role of the Brit Mitzvah coordinator at Folkshul. So that's a relatively new role. I haven't yet officiated any Brit Mitzvot, but I will be officiating most of the Brit Mitzvot of the 12 and 13-year-olds. And I'm really looking forward to that. I've been working with the 12 and 13-year-olds over the past year, and I'll be officiating about like 7 ceremonies this year, starting next month. Um, and it's really been great to be a part of that process and just work with the students on exploring their Jewish identity and figuring out what it means to them. So really looking forward to that and really thankful that this program opened up that role, or opened up that opportunity. Um, and then finally, I'm also very interested in ceremonies for things that are not typically commemorated in our culture. That was a big reason that I ended up pursuing the certification. I'm really interested in doing ceremonies for pregnancy loss and infertility, deciding to be child-free, divorce, mental health and addiction recovery, gender transition, different kinds of milestones that we could commemorate and honor as a way to kind of have more community support and like destigmatize those things. Um, and so I haven't officiated any ceremonies yet in my capacity as like folk school's officiant, but I have incorporated my knowledge on that into my role as a miscarriage and bereavement doula and as a therapist, and often talk with people about like what some kind of ritual or ceremony could look like for those types of things. Um, I recently worked with a client who brought up that she does have a Jewish background, but considers it like a cultural identity, not so much as religious, but she experienced pregnancy loss. And so we talked about like what a Shiva might look like and how that could be an opportunity to get community support over something that is often isolating. So that was really nice to be able to kind of bring um, that experience and this knowledge that I've gained into that role. Um, so yeah, I think that's pretty much a summary of what I've learned. And I would just say I highly recommend the program. It's just been a really incredible experience.
I like to take credit for how articulate Shira is in explaining this, but that's all her. uh, comes out of her experience and knowledge and skill. But part of the point is to get people comfortable in doing that, to practice answering these questions and explaining who we are and what we do. That's one of the trainings in the program. I did want to highlight two things that Shira's story brought to the forefront, I think. And one of them is that from our perspective as humanistic Jews, these life cycle ceremonies and rituals were made by people. They did not come down from above. They were not revealed in some kind of strict format that you must follow. And so, if values change, the ceremonies can change as well. She mentioned the idea of a brit mitzvah, which is an evolution of the term bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, which is kind of a gender binary term. My community calls it a B mitzvah, basing that on something that a congregation in New York created. But the idea is that we want to be inclusive. And so if you can use different terminology, that's fine. And in their community, they call it a Brit Mitzvah. But also the content of what we do is very different. So instead of being assigned a Torah portion for the week, you get to choose something that's meaningful to you. It could be a Torah reading, it could be a reading from modern literature, it could be an idea or an issue that you find important. I've had students do it on what is synagogue architecture because they were interested in architecture, or someone else grappled with what does it mean to be vegetarian and Jewish. Your Seder plate might not have a lamb bone on it because you don't want the dead animal there, um, and so on. So the point is that you can find a topic or issue that's interesting to you, and that applies also to families that have multiple heritages in the family. We had a student who did her bat mitzvah project on the Armenian quarter of Jerusalem because she is Armenian and Jewish. And so she wanted an intersection of those two identities, and we were able to find that in the history of Jerusalem as a city, and also particularly talking about the Armenian part of the old city of Jerusalem. So the point is that it was made by people. The second point that she brought to the forefront is that these are created for people. That we don't just impose a ceremony on you or fill your name in the blank of a form that we've done. We meet with couples or with families. We talk about what's important to them. We have to find out who they are to help the B Mitzvah student choose what their reading is going to be. We personalize it to them. And in some cases, they'll want more traditional elements than we lead, which is fine. If they want to have a family member read the traditional Kaddish at a graveside service where we would read a humanistic version or an alternate poem instead, that's fine. We can have the family member do that. I've had weddings where I'm the MC and they have friends come up and do all kinds of stuff, and I'm just coordinating the ceremony. I've even had events where I'm a consultant and then they have someone else officiate, but they bring in my knowledge in the background to help design the ceremony. The point is that we are doing these for and in collaboration with the people who are celebrating them. So we want to meet their needs. We have our values and our approach, but most importantly, we want it to be personalized to them. Some couples do not want to write their own vows. They are not comfortable speaking in public. They don't want to bare their souls in front of everybody. Maybe they'll write a private statement of love to each other that they read before the ceremony or after the ceremony. And sometimes they're comfortable writing it to me, and then I share what they wrote for everybody. So it's their feelings. I'm just the loudspeaker sharing their thoughts. And that can make it a very personal ceremony in a way that's comfortable for them. That's the dynamic, is we want to make it meaningful and comfortable for them as much as possible and co-create a positive experience. As I said, you can find out more information about the requirements of the program on the Institute's website, which is iishj.org. We also have a YouTube channel with a lot of programs as well. If you want to explore more on what humanistic Judaism is, that's certainly possible too. Well, thanks so much for your time coming in to listen to this. And Shira, thank you for sharing your background and your experience with our officiating program and with the phenomenon of officiating life cycle events as it is. I've always been impressed with your creative approach to how to meet people's needs like this, and also your insight that you talked about today that there's a value to ceremony and ritual, even to people who don't believe it was supernaturally authored or requires a god to be talked to in the ceremony, because we're meeting human needs by doing this, and that's the point. If we can meet human needs for secular people, then that's what a humanistic Jewish officiant's all about.